Angelology is what we're going to speak of today.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about these different levels of experience and of existence. And you and many of us, I suppose, in our lives, we get to go to these places, whether we remember them or not. But we're speaking of the hierarchy of the angels. And so to me, it was like, okay, so it's like these mansions that exist, these different levels. And then when we talk about the nine choirs, or we talk about the inhabitants of these places, are we talking about the actual place? He's talked about Jesus being a station, or angels being an office.
Yes.
So I started to look at all this in a different way. The seven levels of heaven. This is going to be a really intriguing talk that we're going to have.
Yes, because we are going to cover in separate films both angelology and demonology. And what we understand is that, there are hierarchies in the heavens, just as there are hierarchies in the lower realms. And so, yes, that's very true. We have the stations of the angels are their office, their position, and it's like they rule over certain aspects and functions in the heavenly spheres. And some of them have dominion over certain realms and spheres, although they also have certain rights to travel through other realms and spheres depending on their function. And so, yes, exactly. That is true. And so we see this as a hierarchy, but it also shows these realms and spheres going from earth to heaven, from the ground of the physical to the very throne of God.
What guided you to write angelology? Like why is it important? And you're like, okay, so I'm gonna lay this out. And then to add to that question a little bit is where did most of this information come from? Because I know it came from your own experiences and your spiritual reading. So I'll just leave it at that. That's like a three-part question, sort of.
Yeah. Now, when I wrote Angelology, an overview, I wrote it primarily from ancient sacred texts and some of the ancient texts which are considered to be the most authoritative on the angelic spheres and hierarchies. One of the most common one that people know about is the hierarchy of angels according to Dionysius. So this goes into what I would consider the more traditional hierarchies of angels.
A lot to unpack in just
Yes,
this
there
one thing.
is.
Oh my gosh.
And one of the things I'd like to point out about this, just because I can, and I like to throw wrenches in things,
Mm.
is in the Aliens of the Redemption. And ironically, you'll find as well in another book that I recently put out, Related Hierarchies.
Mm.
Yes, we also did this one. So we have, just for people to know as well. So we're talking right now about angelology, an overview, but it would be really tough to cover everything that I've actually written on the subject. But who knows, maybe we'll go into some of this stuff too. Maybe we'll go through this and maybe then we'll hit some of this.
Okay.
So we have angelology and overview, but then we also have this book, which is Out of Body Travel, Astral Travel, and Remote Viewing: Definitions, Similarities, Differences, Spiritual Potential, and Related Hierarchies. And again, I want to go back to what your question was, because your question is important as to why did I write these books on angelology and demonology? So let's look here. So in here, and it's also included in the Aliens of the Redemption, you're going to see that there's a section in here that goes into a great deal more, actually, because the hierarchies of the angels throughout time is so important in out-of-body travel. So, but in this little book, it includes a hierarchy of the angels according to biblical, the pseudo-Dionysius, which is one we're going to go over here. But then the Urantia.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is exciting. So, the Urantia book was put out in the 20th century, And the Urantia book has its own very, very fascinating hierarchy of angels. So I put together an edited version of the Urantia hierarchy of angels, which goes into quite a few things here. I'm going to mark this because I think maybe we'll just go over it.
Okay.
Because, you know, the Urantia book is this 20th century revelation purported to have been given from some kind of extraterrestrial forces to this anonymous receiver. And it's very, very detailed. And I was actually approached by the angels. There's an experience in the Mysteries of the Redemption where the angels came to me, took me to a high celestial heaven, and told me how important it was to read the very first section of the Urantia book and how holy it was. And why? Because it lays out the hierarchy of the angels. Mm-hmm. And it goes into details that nothing else does on the planet. So this is a very unique outline. So I'll keep that one there. Let me just point out a couple of things here in the Aliens of the Redemption. So in the Aliens of the Redemption, we talk about these angelic hierarchies and how they're important. We have the Dionysian, we have the biblical, we have the Urantian, but there's also these angels in the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. Mm-hmm. Emanuel Swedenborg is the 17th century mystic who also wrote a pretty strong, you know, not as organized, but he wrote a hierarchy of angels. And what's also interesting is that Zarathustra, in his hierarchy, has a very, very, very in-depth angelic hierarchy in the Zoroastrian text. Why is that interesting and why does it matter? You ask, of course. And literally, I went through the texts and pulled out all of these things. These are all of the Zoroastrian, these are names of hierarchies, angelic hierarchies in Zoroastrian texts. So why is this interesting? This is interesting because, so in the beginning, the very first monotheistic religion occurred, they occurred about the same time. And that was Zoroastrianism. And we had a flash in the pan with Akhenaten, where Akhenaten came into ancient Egypt, and Akhenaten tried to create a monotheistic worship of the sun god Ra in Egypt. And he started the very first monotheistic religion in the world about the same time. They're like, you know, within 100 years of each other, as Zarathustra did in ancient Iran, ironically, Persia. We have all of these images of Zarathustra like this, flying around like this. There's so much in the literature about Zarathustra, which is very akin to Ezekiel and the wheels, where, you know, we have certain characters in the history where there is question of, were they being visited by heavenly beings or alien beings or both? And so what's interesting here is the first monotheistic religions, which is such a pivotal moment in religious history for this world and this realm, is started with Zarathustra, who is one of the very first, very clear recipients of what may have been intervention from an extraterrestrial species. And one of the key elements, so he brings in a monotheistic religion, he brings in a religion that has a clear doctrine of good and evil, and he also brings in this very, very clear and pretty extensive angelology and hierarchy of angels into the earth at that time. something that had not been done before. And so, why is that important? Let's take it back to the Urantia book, which is also considered some type of extraterrestrial interference. Okay. We're finding that we have the heavenly and the possible intervention of other societies. And then we also have what's also included in this book are extraterrestrial hierarchies. Something that probably you didn't expect when you looked at this. So the hierarchies of the extraterrestrials, which goes into the different races and what we know about some of them and what they, different kinds of life forms that they have, which types of spiritual gifts some of them might have, which ones are more physical, which ones are more spiritual, and what information we have about some of these extraterrestrial hierarchies. We're dealing with what appears to be something that's really important, right? Now, interestingly, when I started with this book in Angelology and its sequel, Demonology, I had a vision. And, you know, a lot of my books, in fact, most of them, it might even be all, I don't just decide I'm going to write a book and it happens. I'm told exactly what the book is. A lot of times that book is then infused into me, and then I'm given the title and I'm told what to do with it. And then it's like an energetic sharing of what it will be. And then all of a sudden I'm just energized and I just continue to work on it. And I didn't even know that George Ritchie, who I had known and done this, you know, Joan Rivers show with in 92, had passed. But he came to me in a mystical experience and he told me I needed to write about the hierarchy of the angels. And he brought up the hierarchy of the angels according to the Urantia book. And so I bet you didn't think you'd get such a detailed answer when you asked me this question.
Good answer.
Why? Why is this important? It's important because everything that we are going to do, if we are going to practice out of body travel, if we are going to do it in a meaningful way, is going to be directed and guided by a hierarchy, a hierarchy of spheres and realms, dimensions. And those spheres and realms and dimensions are overseen by angels, guardians, and in some cases, extraterrestrial beings who also act as guardians, angels, and overseers, because we are all one. So we're all working together. So all of this comes together. Now, if you choose to be ignorant of all of this, where it's like, oh, it doesn't matter, who cares, whatever, then you are much more likely to become subject to another hierarchy, which might be the demonic hierarchy, because then you become much more likely to be tricked, fooled, or in any number of ways lured into lower hierarchies through subconscious promptings by the beings who operate and take care of those lower spheres, whose job it is to tempt and literally take down souls. And I know that a lot of people don't like to deal with that reality, but it is a reality.
They're like threshold guardians.
Threshold guardians. Yeah, you could say
So
that.
we come to a state, and then we're going to the higher realms, that there's different angels perhaps that are overseeing that, but also there may be, when we get into demonology, some dark forces also that could be trying to block that from happening to us, that raising of our vibration, of our soul consciousness.
Something came to me and I'm going to share it that goes along with this as an example. Yes and no, but yes and no. There's a few things in there that I want to add to. So, threshold guardians, yes, but yet they are so much more because their function is much greater than that. So each of them has these other functions, whether it's in the higher or the lower realms. And understanding some of these functions is very helpful for us to, first of all, engender the respect, the holy awe that will help us to approach things with the greater respect that it deserves, but also to really comprehend how things are set up and how we must approach as we go forward. But also, I want to give an example of something that happened last night to me. And I think it happened last night to me so that I could use it as an example today. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to use it. So I was having this experience and I was out of my body and I was being allowed to read from what appeared to be an ancient sacred text. And I was thinking, wow, this is really cool. I'm getting to just read from this ancient sacred text and I'm reading aloud in this mystical sphere. And then I'm reading and there was one or two or three words that were in the text that seemed off to me. And I immediately felt, my discernment little alarms went off. I was like, well, I'm here reading an ancient sacred text. It sure seems harmless, but that does not seem right. And so I immediately called out for help from my guardian angels. And I said, if this has been sent to me by our Lord Jesus Christ, then allow me to continue reading. But if this is a trick, then please show me what's going on. And then all of a sudden, what appeared to be a being that was standing there and allowing me to read the text turned into something else, something dark and demonic. And all of a sudden, what I was reading turned in this horrific demonic doctrine. It was horrible. And I looked at it and I wouldn't say it out loud. And I looked at the beast and I sent that beast back to hell, through the normal stuff that we talked about, a lot of that in the combat. Mm-hmm. And once I did, of course, I returned back to my body. But why is that important? Because all of these things participate in our ability to discern and find our way from here through the steps that we take as a soul into the heights of heaven and protect us from being lured through these stupid little traps that are set up for us all along the way into something else. And these things happen all the time. They happen in these mystical states, but they also happen in our world around us when things that are false and untrue are spoken around us at all times. And if we do not have that interior discernment being cultivated so that we have that sense that something is not right about that, then we easily go the wrong way. And then instead of making that trek up the staircases to heaven, we may go down a different staircase, a different way.
That's such a good point. For one, it seems that often when there's manipulation that's happening, there'll be a lot of truth that's being said, and just it can be twisted just a little bit tweaked in a couple of ways, and it can have a completely different meaning. And so when we get into, this is a good thing to preface because we're going to be speaking about demonology at some point, and a lot of people don't want to go there. They don't want to even no, I don't want to get into that vibration. But again, it's going back to the discernment. So if we're not aware of what is happening with the dark and what they do and what their ways of doing things are and how they may try to fool us, then we're going to be more easily fooled.
Yes, because they don't come at you with They don't just come to you and say, hey, I'm a filthy demon. Come with me.
Yeah. Here's how I really look. Right? It's like, oh, great. Yeah. Let's hang out.
Yeah, they don't do that. They do things where they fill it with a lot of stuff that appears true, and then something is thrown in that is very subtle. And they do this not just with, like what I experienced last night with a text. They do it with everything around us that we hear, whether it's propaganda in our world, but it's also just with what we are told to believe all around us, and with everything that we decide to do or not do in our day-to-day lives. Every one of us has to make choices every single day that we have to make discernments about.
Mm-hmm.
It's everything. I know, I remember reading in the Dialogue of the Devils by Reverend McGowan, where he spoke of, in his mystical gift, he was allowed to listen to the demons plotting against humanity as to how he would mess them up and stuff. And so he would hear them talking about, and he wrote this in, probably, I'm guessing, but it would be maybe 16 or 1700s, somewhere thereabouts. And the demons would be talking about changing a fashion that would make the women more vain, and it would be a little bit more lustful. And if you think about this and how just the subtleties of this, where it's a slight change in the fashion of the day, or a piece of jewelry, or a different way that they had women do something to their hair, and they would just be very subtle, one thing at a time, one thing at a time. And they would do stuff like this. And it would be the same thing they would do to men, come up with, oh, it's not a big deal if I just go gamble a little bit longer, or you know what I mean? And it was just very eye-opening to read the Reverend John McGowan's experiences. And that's part of the reason I included him in the Forgotten Mystics, in that book that I wrote, Forgotten Mystics. And so he's a very fascinating mystic, but that's what we're kind of dealing with in those kinds of things. And so understanding who's working for us and who's working against us, and who do we need to call on when we are in different circumstances and situations. And it also helps when you start having these experiences to be able to, you won't always be able to identify every being that you see, but there will be sometimes, like when you're like, wow, that's my first cherubim. How exciting is that? I'm seeing one for the first time. Or, where you will see one of an archangel, or Saint Michael, for example, or the seraphims are ones that you don't see very often, but that happens once in a while. But the different types of angels that you might see, or the ones who serve with them or under them. So you might not see the top dog, but you might see their servants, the ones who serve with them. And having an understanding of who they are and what they do and what their function is always helpful to us.
Yes, and not to go directly to demonology, but also it's the same with the different facets that make up the different hierarchy of the demons, is to also
absolutely.
And it's also as above, so below, because so much of that is just happening in this mortal realm, where there's the good guys with different qualities. As I'm looking over, for instance, the archangels, or the 9 choirs of angels, and the different virtues and aspects that they have. It's the same thing here on earth. There's some souls that have those aspects, just as there's with demonology, there are darker aspects. There's people on earth that have those same aspects too, that they're wrestling with. And there's this battle of good and evil that we're going against here.
Right. And, just to throw something out that I think will help a lot of people, just because it's important to know, just knowing who your enemy is or who your champion will be is really helpful. I'm going to just throw out one of the most active demons in the world today is Asmodeus. And that's because Asmodeus is the demon who tries to destroy families and family life. And so it's good for people to know that, because you can pray against Asmodeus. So if you're having problems with things like that, you may have an Asmodeus problem.
And it's this the other week I was thinking about this. So let's say Asmodeus, because there are people that we will see in certain offices or have a certain job where their job is kind of undermining families. And you can almost just, if you're in the audience while they're giving a speech, just point at them and go, Asmodeus. Because that's who is behind them and working through them in that moment. Just as we can look at certain people and we can call them out as the angels that they're being in that moment.
Yes. And so it allows us then to have more of an idea of what we need to pray for. It allows us to be more kind of girded, have our loins girded, as they say, be ready and more prepared in those situations when we're dealing with stuff that we know we're dealing with, or when we get hit with something we don't realize we're going to get hit with, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, well, I know what that is. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Having the knowledge is always going to be helpful, whether it's something you're aware of or something that's a surprise attack or a surprise event. Understanding, the Bible states, it's a battle against principalities and powers of good and evil. That's what this is. These are the principalities and powers, the angels and the demons.
And if we know what darkness is happening, and we know which heavenly light being can thwart that, we see very clearly, like, oh, it's this kind of darkness, that's this kind of demon. Oh, okay, well, it's this angel just will totally eradicate that one real quick.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. Yes.
I want to just quickly talk about our outline a little bit.
Okay.
So we're going to start off with, as you mentioned, Dionysius and the hierarchy of angels, and then the Ophanim, the angels of the throne, the Kadishim, the seat of judgment. We're going to talk about the Merkaba, the 9 choirs, their emblems, apparels, etc. We're going to talk about archangels, angels, the 3 triads. We're going to talk about the apocalypse of the Holy Mother of God concerning the chastisements, angels of the 7 heavens, the 24 elders. And this one I like about the archangels. It's called the Magnificent 7. That sounds like a movie right there. And then writing by Enoch the Patriarch about the Watchmen. We're going to talk about other archangels, and another writing I see after that from the book of Enoch on the 70 princes and the archangels of the Sephiroth, Shekinah, Ein Sof, and guardian angels, angel of ascension, and eons. That's a lot of stuff. Good thing we have a outline.
Outlines are good.
I have this quote from Ephesians 6:12.
You want to use it?
For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Go. You want to start it off that way? You can do that.
I just did. That was it. Done. All right, that's it for Angelology. Thanks for coming, everyone. Bye, Marilynn.
Hi.
I forget sometimes that I edit. Oh, that's right, I edit. Got skills. Well, I think that was a really great intro of lots of stuff that we talked about. Really cool.
I liked it too. Yeah. And I think ironically what we thought we were just gibbering about is perfect actually to start it off too. It's a little editing. It'll be great.
Okay, well, let's start off with a quote. Ephesians 6:12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
Says it all, doesn't it? Yeah, and what happens here is we forget that this really is happening at all times in our world. And I think maybe people are starting to realize this as they see some of the things that are happening at this time. I remember, though, I'm just going to share something that happened a long time ago, but I'll just kind of share it, where a friend of mine and I had a situation where we were just randomly chased by some crazy driver on the street who was really, was just very bizarre. We were on a street in the back mountain country of Colorado, and the details really don't matter. But this person literally just out of nowhere pushed us off the road. And we realized, because we're out in the middle of nowhere, there's no other cars, we realized we were in a fight for our life. So we were literally just trying to outrun this vehicle. We had no idea why this person was doing this. We called the cops. My friend was on the phone with the cops, but the cops were not getting there anywhere fast enough. And obviously we got away. It turned out later that these were some type of human traffickers, actually.
What?
Yeah. But we had to outrun them. We ended up in the hospital because it was such a spiritual attack. While we were actually en route, I thought I had a heart attack, and my friend was convinced I had a heart attack because I literally bowled over. It was a spiritual, thing happened. It was so intense. You could feel the principalities and powers. And it was interesting because this is a friend of mine I've known for decades, and when we got home, she said to me, she said, never in my life have I actually felt the principalities and powers of evil. And she said, but I felt the principalities and powers of evil. She said it wasn't like we were just being chased by some crazy dude, whoever that was. Mm-hmm. She said, the principalities of evil, I felt them. It was like, the hounds of hell were completely immersed in this vehicle and following this vehicle. It was so palpably present. We could feel that this was a battle between principalities and powers, and we'd taken quite a hit, and she's like, I knew you had a heart attack when you bowled over. And the test results showed that I did not have a heart attack, but I took an energetic hit that was pretty hard, whatever happened. And so the point being,
so this is an actual real experience.
Yeah, this happened. Jeez. Yeah. And, so there are times in our lives when we suddenly become aware that, oh, this is not a casual saying in the Bible. This is real. There are real battles of principalities and powers. And we see this when people become aware of things. Like, for instance, you can even look at how people responded to the film that came out about human trafficking. And all of a sudden there was this outpouring of both principalities good and principalities of evil, all coming as a battle towards it. But you see all kinds of stuff going on in our world that I think it's pretty hard to miss, that we have this eternal struggle going on that's now manifesting on the earth in such a profound way. It's pretty hard to miss. And there are people missing it still, but it's pretty hard to miss.